Good morning, everyone. It is just a little bit early. We're just coming up on 11:30 now, so I'm going to give it a minute or two. So that's a good thing. I want to give people a chance to join in. Today is day 3 of Inktober. It's also Saturday, so that means I'm going to do my Inktober tangle as my weekly exploration. So today's tangle from the Inktober list is Anthem by Jody Genovese. So that's the one we're going to do today. It's a fun tangle. It's newer to me. I've done it once before in another project. I had done a tangulation in Susan Moen's class. So we had done Anthem around the outside as a border for this kaleidoscope tile. So I really liked it then, but I hadn't played with it a whole lot before getting set up for this one. Good morning, Linda. Before getting set up for this live. And I've played with it a little bit since then. I really like it a lot. I think there's some fun possibilities for it. There's definitely some neat things that can be done with it. I'm going to do some tiles for you. I'm also going to add it into my Inktober journal. So I'm going to get started. Let me see here. So I just want to talk about the ones that I have here to start with. If you are new to my little weekly explorations, I always show how to draw the pattern in its most simplistic, most basic form. And then I show a couple of variations of ideas that you can incorporate into your tangling, into using this tile, or this in your tiles and your work. And then I usually demo a couple of different tangulations or variations. So this is Anthem. I have done it in 3 slightly different variations here. Good morning, Pam. I have done it in a shorter, crisper version. I have done it in a slightly rounded version, and then I've done it in a long, skinny version. Just so that you can see that by making minor changes to your strokes, you're going to come up with a slightly different look. All of these are drawn basically the same way, with just minor variations. You can also use Anthem. Good morning, Betty. Good morning, Sandra. Those of you that have been on my live before know that I like to use my patterns as borders. I think that they're a really fun, really great way to bring a pattern in, to add a little bit more to the outside. In this case, this is a really complex border. I probably would have done a more simple one if I was actually going to put something in the center. But since I really wanted to use it as the focal point, to point out that you can use this as a border, I made it a little more complex. So there's that. And then this one, I really like the way this tile turned out. So I used Anthem in this, and then I did some auras on it, and I actually filled in parts of Anthem with another pattern. So I used a fill in this pattern. So these are some of the ways that you can use your patterns when you are when you're playing with them, when you're exploring them. These are just a couple really basic ideas, ways to mix it up so that you're not always drawing your pattern the same way. But that aside, we want to know how we draw this pattern, right? So I'm going to start out, I'm going to put my dots on my tile with my pencil. And then I'm going to add my border. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to do this a little bit large. And you're obviously going to get a different look depending on the size of these that you draw. But because I just want to show you the basics of this pattern, I want them to be fairly big so that they're nice and clear for you to see. I see I had some other people join. Good morning. Sorry if I missed you. Glad to have you here. I'm going to come in and I am going to make my first pen strokes. So I'm going to make, this is not the pen that I want to use. This is an 08. That's not what I want. There we go. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to make a curved stroke. Okay, so kind of like a little peak. I'm going to make a slightly rounded peak down a little bit lower. I'm now going to bring in some lines, right? And then I'm going to make a line down the center. And then I'm going to pull down towards one main point. These other lines to give me kind of a crystal shape. Right? And I tend to make mine a little bit rounded. Let's see. I'm going to do another one. So I'm going to make this one because like I did here, I want to show you that by changing the initial shape. So this is really pointy, right? That's not a rounded peak. So this one I'm going to bring up and that one's going to be a little more rounded. Okay. I'm going to pull these lines in and make a third. So I've got those 3 lines. Now again, I'm going to pull this down. I'm going to pull this one down. And I'm aiming towards a central kind of point when I do those. Okay. So I've got a more rounded one. I've got a long spikier one. We'll do one that's kind of in between. So I'm going to, this one I kind of want this to be kind of short and fat. So while this is pointy, it's not coming up quite as sharply. I'm going to make a round curve. Again, I'm going to make those lines, so I'm connecting those 2 together. I'm going to make a third line right down the center, and I have noticed a lot of times I forget this center line, and it does make a big difference. It doesn't look right without it. It doesn't have that crystal look. And then I'm pulling these down. I think a lot of the beauty of this tangle comes from the way you shade it. And you can shade this in a lot of different ways, but the way I have found it to be most effective in shading is I like to put kind of like an upside down L in each of these little facets at the top. So it's kind of like if I flipped it over, it's an upside down L. So I'm kind of creating a little aura with my graphite. And then I'm just accenting that corner. And then I just like to put a little line down there. Okay, so it's just some little hints of graphite, and then I smooth those out. Sometimes I slide this over. I play with it, and depending on my day and my mood determines how much graphite I actually lay down. But once you add that graphite, this is another one of those tangles that really does, the magic starts to happen when you lay down the graphite, and this is looks really cool in color. So you can see how this kind of takes on a little bit more dimension. So once I have the dimension in these side facets, I come to the face, And you could certainly add tangles in there if you wanted to, like I did here. But because I want these to be, you know, more like this, to be the pure tangle, I'm just going to add a little bit of accent. So again, I'm auraing that with my graphite, and I'm bringing a line down. And I'm going to, and I always tend to do it the same way. So I do it so it auras, and then I make my line down on my right. But you could certainly do it on the left too if you were more comfortable doing it that way. It's just the way I draw it. And then I soften it and pull down my graphite. Okay. This pattern is a little more complex than some of the others that I've done on here, just because it's really not. It's just a little different. It has some steps that I think you kind of have to really pay attention to when you do them. It's not quite as freeform as some of the others, but it has a really cool effect. You get some really neat shapes out of it, and I think that it's a lot of fun to draw. So I definitely encourage you to incorporate it into your tangle patterns. Good morning. I see a whole bunch of you have joined me while I was doing that. So good morning. I'm glad to have you here. So there are my 3 variations there, and then obviously I would either add more or I would do something in the background. The one little piece that I didn't do is adding a little bit of rounding to some of these spots, especially on the top. So like this little top peak, and then right here in this corner, and then off here on the side. And I have played with moving these little rounded spots around. These are where they were pointed out in the original, and I really kind of actually like them there. So you can certainly find the step out to this on Tangle Patterns, or look, or by Googling Anthem. It's by Jody Genovese. I like it a lot. I definitely am going to start using it some more. I'm going to put it in my Inktober now, and then I will do some more variations. So, because I'm going to be drawing this one a lot, I'm actually going to do it in one of my teeny little spaces. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to do it in this little triangle spot. So I am going to do, let's see, I'm going to do kind of a peak here, and then my little curve. And then I pull these down. I'm not going to do anything super fancy here. I'm just going to add it in a couple little of these crystals. Because I wanted to have lots of time to do some variations on this. So I want my third one to kind of go off to the side. So I turned my journal, and I'm going to make a longer, skinnier one kind of there. And my little curve, bring that up, bring this down. My other one's going to be off to the side, so I'm not even going to worry about it. There we go. So I've been adding these little like tipply spaces to kind of add some unity to my Inktober tangling. So I'm going to add a couple of those in. Add in that little bit of rounding on these. I'm really happy to be to actually have a plan for Inktober this year. I always say I'm going to, and then I don't always get to it. So a little bit of shading, not a ton, just a little bit. These aren't very big spaces, so I don't need to do a lot. Soften it up a little bit, and that's my Inktober tangling for the day. So I'm doing these Inktober spaces one a day, every day. I'm trying to keep my Saturdays the same, right? So I don't want to take anything away from what I've been doing. So I'm going to probably do my Saturday tangles will probably be my smallest ones, because I'm also doing tiles for you as well. But the other thing to keep in mind is, if you're doing Inktober, or if you're doing a tangle practice and you're trying to get yourself to the point where you're doing it every day, either for relaxation or stress reduction, or just because you want to, jumpstart your creativity, or whatever it is you're doing, don't think that if you don't have time to do a whole tile, or you don't have time to do a whole section like this, or like a whole section like this, or even like this, if you only have a couple minutes, it's okay. So if you only have time to do something that's this big, take that time and do it. Don't say, oh, I don't have time to do a big piece. I don't have time to do, a whole tile. It's one of the reasons that we do a string, so that even if you only have a couple minutes, you still have time to do it. And so often I think that in our very busy lives, we tell ourselves that if we don't have time to do it full force, or we don't have time to sit down and spend 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour on something, that we don't have time to do it at all. But that only took me probably 2 minutes to do that little piece in my Inktober journal. And I really wanted to do that to just point out, it doesn't have to be big. Just do it. Just take the time to actually take for yourselves and your tangling and actually do something, even if it's little. All right, so I said I was going to do a couple other things. So I have my basic one. I have it with this filled in a little bit. I saved the shading for this section until after, because I wanted to show you how, even with my tangles in there, I can go in and I can add a little bit of shading on the print humps I have in there, right? So I soften that a little bit. But then I'm still going to come in and I'm going to aura this peak. And I'm going to aura there, and I'm going to put some graphite down there. And that is going to make it look like there's a reflection on that face, on that facet of that crystal. So you can see how it adds kind of a little bit of a layer. Okay. Oh, good, Jen. I'm glad that the shading helped. I think shading really makes a difference on this tile. And a lot of times the step outs are great, but we don't always get to see, the shading or how they, because a lot of times, and I know that I myself as a CZT tend to be really guilty of this, I just assume that everybody is going to be able to figure out how to shade it. And especially if somebody is new to tangling, they may not, instinctively have the idea that, you should go in and you should add shading here, or you should add shading here. So I always try and add some of that, because I really do think that shading's where the magic happens. I did one other piece to show you, and this is my macro version or my string version. So it's just two of these anthems placed down in kind of a crisscross, and that leaves me, a lot of cool spaces to do some cool shading on it. It also gave me 1, 2, 3, 4 more other spaces that I could come in and tangle. I didn't do that on here, but you certainly could. So I'm not going to do a lot of other tangling today, because the focus is on this particular pattern. But I wanted you to see how that could be used as a string. Okay, so now we've got 4 different ways of drawing it. Well, I say 4, but actually we have 4, 5, 6, because this shows the variation of adding, long skinny ones and short stubby ones and rounding them a little bit more. One thing that I do want to do is I want to show you them drawn in a spiral. This is one of my favorite ways to tangle, is to tangle in spirals. So I'm going to kind of make a spiral here, kind of off the side. I don't want it centered. I think that if everything's always in the center, that it loses some interest. I'm going to take a sip of my tea because I haven't had enough caffeine yet today. And now I am going to start. I'm going to make a peak here. I'm going to make one kind of off to the side. So here's my line. I kind of have one off to the side there. I usually do 2 or 3 to start. So here's another one that's slightly off center, but it's overlapping a little bit. So I usually do a couple first, and then I add to it. So I kind of build out, and I would do that if I were making a border like this one, or if I was just stacking a whole bunch of them. I would just do a couple and then I would fill in. And it's kind of what I do with like flux as well. Okay. So I made my initial peak, and then I made my little curved piece. I'm going to add in those little connector pieces and my center line. And now I'm going to pull this down towards my spiral line. Okay. Now I'm going to come up here, and I don't want these perfectly stacked together, which is why I offset them. So now I'm going to add that curve, and you can always refine where things lay. I'm going to pull this in towards that spiral, so now it kind of looks like they're sort of stacked together. I'm going to add another one here. So there's my curve. I'm going to bring this out a little bit. Oh, see, remember I said I forget that line a lot? And it really does make a difference having that in there. It really breaks it up and makes it look more faceted. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to bring this line in. Bring this line in towards my spiral. I'm going to do another one here. So that peak is just slightly off center. It's going to overlap that a little bit, but not a ton. My curve, my little connector lines. Bring this down towards where I drew that spiral. And you can see how this is going to take on that crystal spiral, right? So this is a lot of fun for like snowflakes and winter scenes, or even just, you know, kind of abstract. So I'm just kind of following the spiral loosely. I tend to, when I try and refine it, it always kind of goes off at a little bit of a wonky angle, but it never really seems to matter all that much. Your lines may be very much straighter than mine. I'm never really good with straight lines. People say all the time that I have really straight lines. They're not. They just look straight because I have a whole bunch of them, right? And that's, I'm a firm believer in that. Straight-ish is always good enough. So I am going to draw this one off the page. Okay, I want this Anthem to kind of go up here, but I want to stay within my border. So because this is a newer to me pattern, and I'm not quite sure how or the best way to go off the edge, I'm going to take a little piece of scrap paper. And this is a trick that you can always do with a pattern. If you want to draw off the page, or you want to draw over your border, but you're not quite sure how to line it up or where to go and what's going to be seen and what's not, I'm simply lining this little scrap piece of paper up with my border. So I'm butting them right up together. I'm going to draw my little peak, and I'm drawing it right onto that piece of scrap paper there. Okay, I'm going to add my little curve, my little connector pieces. I'm going to draw in that center stripe. I'm going to pull it down. Okay, so I've drawn the whole Anthem. Now when I take this away, You can see how that's off the page, right? So I didn't change the integrity or what I'd planned on drawing. I just took it away. And with more experience and with a lot of, you know, when I've drawn a pattern a lot, normally I would just go in and I'd be like, okay, so I'm going to make my peak here, and I can sort of visualize it with my pen. But if I'm not sure, if it's a new pattern, if it's something that I'm not as familiar with, or even if I just really want it to look a little more precise, it cost me a teeny tiny edge of a piece of scrap paper, right? And I keep these on my desk all the time to match colors. I think most of you know that I'm primarily a watercolorist, so I'm constantly doing like little stuff like this just to kind of play with it. And because that's a scrap, I could have grabbed that and used that as well. Just keep a piece of paper. I can use this over and over and over and over again. Even a tile, maybe a tile that you started and you didn't love. So now, you know, that's going to curve around. So maybe I don't want, and I'm going to use the same hint here. Maybe I want only the very tip of this one for the start of this spiral. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to draw that little peak, right? And I'm going to draw my curve. This piece is going to come up, and then I'm going to connect there, and I'm going to connect there. I don't need to pull those down. I mean, I could, you know, to see how that would finish off, but because that little peak right there is the only part that's showing, I could take this away at any point. Okay, so it's just something that, you know, it's a little hint that might help with, you know, especially new patterns. Okay, so my peak, my curve, my connections, pull this down. And especially when you're going in like a spiral or something that's not quite as easy to line up, it doesn't hurt to you know, to kind of use some of these little pieces. In tangling, we don't worry a lot about tools, but you can certainly use things that are handy and are available to you if you want to you know, step stuff up a little bit. So I'm going to, again, I'm just adding in a couple of these in advance so that I, you know, kind of get an idea how they're going to curl and how they're going to bend before I add a lot. So I'm going to refine this a little and bring it a little bigger. I'm going to add my connections, my center. I'm going to pull this down. This one's a little wonkier than I might have liked, but I actually kind of like the way that it turned out. It looks like it's just precariously tipped on the edge there, and I like that. They don't all have to stack up perfectly neatly. So there's my connections, my center. I'm going to pull this down. I'm pulling towards my spiral. Last night I taught a class I call Tunnel Vision. And it's about 3D, and let me see if I can find the piece I'm looking for. Probably not, because I stick things everywhere when I finish classes. Oh, here we go. But one of the things I talk about is making a point to draw all your lines to, right? So when I'm drawing these little spirals, I'm drawing my lines, my my pull down lines. I don't know what I would actually call them, but these lines that I pull down, I'm pulling them towards that spiraled line so that they all have kind of a centered weighted point. Okay, so I'll do another one here. There's my peak, there's my curve, my little connectors, and my middle line. And then again, I'm bringing these down. As I pull them, I'm pulling them towards that spiral. Okay. Okay, so I can probably fit a couple more here. I'm going to draw on the edge again. I'm going to use this tip again just because I think that it's a good idea to kind of like refine that little hint for you, so that you see how I did it. I lined it up on my edge. I'm just drawing it like I would draw it as if it was the whole piece of paper. I'm treating these as one. So my little connectors, my center is actually right there, which is kind of cool. I'm bringing these down towards my spiral, and then I can just move that out of the way. So I thought I was going to have, I would finish off with that one here, but I think I'm actually going to go with two. So I'll have one go off this way, and then I'll have one come off this way. And mine tend to be a little pointier than a lot of people's. I find it very easy to draw that peak with a nice point in it. And yours is going to look the way yours is going to look. Yours might be more pointy, yours might be more rounded. Both are good. Both are, very valid and very fun ways of drawing it. And by drawing them both, you'll get a lot of variety. So these are a lot of fun to draw. I'm not going to shade this one because I want time to show you some more stuff. For some reason now this reminds me of a dragon. I don't know why, but it reminds me of a dragon. So that could turn into something else later on. Ice crystals, it just so many fun things that you see and then they turn into something else. One of my favorite things to do, and I think you all know this by now, is I like to turn patterns into flowers. Some are easier than others to make into flowers. Yes, dragon tail, Linda, absolutely, like a dragon's tail or a lizard, or I don't know. I look at it and I think I see this. I don't know. I'm gonna have to play with it more. But last night when I did my class, I had demonstrated doing some shading in the center of a tile, and I went to go toss the tile, and I thought, well, that's silly, because tomorrow when I demo my Anthem, I'm going to draw a flower that has shading in the middle. So I thought I would just use this tile and show you how I draw it. And my shading is actually kind of on it first. So the way I got this shading, and I'll use this little scrap piece of paper that I've been using all morning, all I did was I drew an orb in my graphite, and then I took a tortillon, and this one has a lot of graphite on it because I used it in my class last night. But I'm going to soften my graphite ring, right, by spreading it out, and I'm lightening my pressure as I go so that I kind of have a ring. And then I'm just going to come in and I'm going to smudge it a little bit more until it's as softened as I want it to be. And you could certainly do this in advance, or you could do this at the end. I happened to have the piece that already had the shading on it, so I'm going to use it as is. Waste not, want not, right? So I'm going to kind of, and I'm not going to actually draw this in, I'm going to kind of mentally create a ring that's about this size around my center. And I'm going to lay down a series, and these I'm doing a little bit rounder, of peaks. And you could certainly make these more more crisp and more sharp, a little more stabby looking if you wanted to make it look more ice crystal like. Maybe you wanted it to look like a snowflake instead of a flower. Okay, so I've got these arcs going around, and now I'm going to come in and I'm going to add evenly spaced. I'm going to add that little arc, right? So that arc is this arc. I'm going to add my connectors. So there, and one right down the center, and there, and there. Gonna make those actually meet. And one right down the center. Like I said, don't be afraid to refine these if as you draw them you're not happy with them. Especially, you know, when you're drawing a whole bunch of them in a row. So this kind of looks like an atom or something right now, but it will turn into a flower. Some patterns are easier to turn into flowers than others. The first time I saw this pattern, I thought, I want to make ice crystal flowers out of that. Okay, so that's my first layer. I have all these little tips to these crystals. Now I'm going to pull this down towards that center. And I always use the hollow bound method. I tend to try to not draw over a line that I've already drawn. So right here where this would have crisscrossed, I just stopped it. And I'm going to do the same here. So that comes down to about there. And this one fills in quickly and nice, giving us these little petal looking pieces. And it could be done right here, right? I could say, okay, there's my flower, and I could draw another one here, and maybe another one here, maybe another one here. And if I was doing snowflakes, that's probably exactly what I would do. But because I'm doing a flower, I'm actually going to come up here, and I'm going to add a second row, some more petals. And I'm going up between where there's these little gaps. So I'm making my curve kind of in that, above in that space, right? And you can see this isn't perfectly centered. I never have anything perfectly centered because I rarely use tools to do that. So then I'm going to add in those little arcs. Right? My little connector pieces and my stripe down the middle. And I always go kind of fast when I do my lives because I want to fit in as much as I can. In other classes I tend to go slower. And in my tangling work I usually tangle much slower than this. So my lines are usually not quite as neat in my lives as they are in my other work, but my goal is to give you as much information in a fairly short period of time as I possibly can. If it's easier for you, you could certainly finish one of these all in one instead of going on to the next one. I just find for me, it's easier for me to complete one step and then come back and do the rest of the steps, right? So I've got those. I'm going to pull these down now. And again, using that hollow bound method, it's not crisscrossing anything that's already there. Okay, so now I've added to these little crystal flowers. So now it's got a second row. It's got some cool interest going on from the shading that it's got in the center. When I'm done with this, I could call it done. You could come in and you could add, you know, additional shading. You could shade each and every one of these the way that we did here, you know, so I could add all of those little faceted curves. I could come in, I actually am going to add another little darker ring right around the center there with my graphite, And then I'm just going to soften that a little bit more so that it blends out. And I probably will play with the shading on this before I post it later. But I will come in and I'll do some shading right here in like these little recesses so that you can see that these ones are behind the others. And it's a really fun way to draw it. So like I said, you know, we look at this and we see these, but we can take it and we can turn it into a whole bunch of different ways of drawing it. And I hope that, you know, this gave you some ideas, that maybe you saw something that I did here today that, you know, sent you in a different direction with it, and that you might do something, you know, something new or something you hadn't thought of before. One thing I do want to try, and I'm going to do this kind of as a little bonus piece because I don't know if this is actually going to work or not because I haven't tried it before, but I meant to last night, but then I got tired and decided to go to sleep instead. So I'm going to, really quickly, I'm just going to do, let's see, we'll do 1, 2, and maybe a third. That kind of looks like a little face, but that wasn't what I was planning to do. But I could see where you could come up with something different there too. So now I'm going to make my little connectors. I'm going to refine this a little bit. So if I were going to plan where my little dot is, my area to pull everything towards, it would be right here. Okay. So now I'm going to add my center line. I'm going to pull down these little facets. So what I've been wondering is how this would look if I were to add auras on the inside. So that's something that I've been wanting to try. And I think it's going to look cool, but I don't know. It might look too busy. So I figured I would try it because that's what this is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about exploring the different possibilities and trying different things in it. You know, not every pattern takes the same treatment and gives you the same results. So just don't be afraid to try it, even if it's something you've never done before. I mean, worst case scenario, you end up with a tile you don't love, and then you can turn it into something else. So this is kind of neat. This looks like church windows to me, like stained glass or leaded glass. I actually kind of like it a lot. And all I'm doing is I'm auraing the spaces that I've already created. I don't know that I do like a whole bunch of auras, but I could see doing this and then coming into my inner spaces and adding other tangles like it was a stained glass window. So I'm going to call this a win, and I would encourage you to play with that. So I didn't do any rounding on this one yet, and I actually didn't do any rounding on these either. I may not. I don't always add it, and adding it changes the look as well. So that's just something else to think about and to keep in mind, right? You know, if you leave pieces out, if you add pieces in, you're going to get a different look. So yeah, I really like this. I think that it adds a boldness to it. It changes the overall feel of the tangle, and it's definitely something I would do again. I could also see using, instead of solid lines for my auras, I could see using something like, what did I do with my scrap paper? I don't know. But using something like a little stitch mark, so where it's dotted, so, you know, come in. That is a terrible anthem, but, you know, doing something like this instead of the aura, just to kind of change it up. But I really like that a lot. I'm glad that I tried it. And I want to encourage you to do that with things all the time. To just, you know, grab your pen. If you think of an idea, grab your pen and give it a shot. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's just paper. So I will shade this. I will have these finished later today. I'm not sure exactly what time. I kind of have a lot going on. But your pattern sheet will be up today and should have some, hopefully, fun starting ideas for you with these. And I hope that you come up with some cool stuff for your anthems. And I hope that if you aren't doing Inktober, that you are, you know, still making time to add in tangling, you know, to kind of play with the things that are out there. And if you are doing Inktober, that you don't get overwhelmed, and that if you miss a day, that you don't just give up, because I have been very guilty of doing that myself in the past. And you can, you know, you can always dive back in. I had an Inktober that I finished like 2 months later once. It's okay, it's not a competition, so don't worry if you miss some and you have to catch up, or even if you don't ever catch up, you know, or if you know, it's got a pattern listed and it's a pattern you don't like, skip it, do a different pattern. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as everybody else's. So all right, it is Saturday. It is October 3rd. I do not know how it is already October. But thank you so much for joining me this morning. I hope everybody has a great day, has a great rest of the weekend. And I will see you all soon. I am doing daily lives. They are not very long. My daily live when I do my Inktober is usually just about 10 or 15 minutes at most. But I am going to continue through October doing my weekly lives like I am with the explorations. So those aren't going away, and they're not changing. But the daily ones are much shorter, just in case anybody was wondering. So if you want to, you can certainly follow along and do your Inktober with me. I do it live at 11:30 Eastern in the morning. And if not, I'll see you next week. Everybody have a great one.